Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This is Tabletop Cyberpunk. My name is JonJonTheWise. You are listening to the podcast about Cyberpunk Red and 2020 and 2077 and anything Cyberpunk that there is. And today's show is called Making the Game. This is the debut of a new show that I'm doing with my guest. And hopefully we'll be doing this more often. But before we get into that, check out the Discord community. The link will be in the description below. It's a community of cyberpunk folks that want to hang out with you and learn about all the things that you know, and they want to trade ideas. So get in that Discord community. Find me on social media at JonJonTheWise. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, JonJonTheWise, where I have cool content all the time. I mean, if you don't already know that, then crazy. That's where I make most of my juice, my cyberpunk juice, as they say. And make sure you guys hop on that Patreon, patreon.com/JonJonTheWise, where you would be hearing this episode sooner than anybody else. And there's exclusive content and all kinds of stuff. And you can just support your boy, John, if you like the stuff that I do. I greatly appreciate it. Now, let's get straight to it. I have an illustrious guest with me, Patrick Knaus, not Canoose, from Two Brothers Gaming. Patrick, how are you doing today?
Oh man, awesome! And you got my name right, which is impressive in and of itself. So
that's right. Yeah. That's right.
So yeah, I'm half of Two Brothers Gaming. My brother Doug Knaus, he pronounces it the same way weirdly, and I play games on Twitch. So Two Brothers Gaming there. We have a Facebook page, Two Brothers Gaming, on Twitter, and basically we play games like we did in the 80s, where I was game master and subjected him to endless amounts of games because that's the only way we could play. So we play it that way a lot now, but we also run some adventures with some friends and guests, and hopefully John's someday you'll be on one.
Hell yeah.
And so we're making games, and to be Cyberpunk tomorrow night is episode. Well, I should say we are running a Night City Nights detective session. So we're coming up on episode 4, and going to play that out as a serial killer that likes his lyrics and cyberware, not attached to bodies, makes his way across the city. But and we're making games and having lots of fun. So
yeah, there it is. Dude, this cyberpunk like detective story I feel like it works so perfect. By the way, you guys might hear my son screaming in the background. He's going through the terrible twos, and that's just how it goes. So I apologize in advance because of that. But that whole I love mysteries in I just love mystery cyberpunk things. Like all my campaigns have always been mysteries.
Yes. Yeah, and it works so well in the setting, just to, that noir feel to it. And, it's Blade Runner, right? Blade Runner is basically a big mystery.
Yeah.
Right? Just a big mystery. And so much of it works that way. And I love it. It seems like the preeminent place to have detectives and their run-ins with the undercity, the dark belly, and occasionally help out some worthy people. But those are hard to find sometimes in Night City. So
yeah, as a cop or detective, you get the full taste of a cyberpunk city because you got to talk to everybody, the good guys, the bad guys, the middle guys, like everything, and you're just like moving from place to place. You never rest. PCs never sleep. So
and no one likes you.
Exactly.
Everyone's
and there's just bodies. You're just leaving bodies on the street. Oh man. Well, just we should probably tell people what this show is all about. So, I had this idea. Well, first of all, I've been wanting to work with Patrick for quite some time, and finally, I had this awesome idea because Patrick and his brother are both making games. Actual pen and paper RPG games that will be featured on this channel because I would love to play games that my friends make. And I was like, man, he probably has so much insight into what it means to make a game. We all think one day it would be pretty cool if I could make a game, and you guys are like actually doing it,
Yeah.
So I decided, why don't I get with Patrick? We'll get together and we'll talk about making homebrew rules, making just breaking down dice mechanics, breaking down things that. And if you guys have ever played in any of my games, I'll randomly have you roll dice for something that's completely not in the book. And even like game designers, I had James Hutt, the guy that created Cyberpunk Red, in my game, and he's like, "Wait, what is this thing that we're doing?" And I was like, I forgot. I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'm doing some crazy shit that I came up with a long time ago." And I think it would be really cool if Patrick and I bounce some ideas for Cyberpunk, any really tabletop games. But yeah, that's the idea of it, and hopefully we'll do that. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we will. I think we shall succeed here, and yeah, I love the topic. So it's so much fun, and we all hack our games. Every GM's ultimately ends up hacking the game in some form or manner because the rules can only cover so much, and I hope people feel comfortable with it. I think it's kind of on those fly decisions, but yeah, and hearing the ideas and bouncing them back and forth just spawns other ideas and ways of dealing with situations in game. So
Yeah, exactly. I especially like I'll play one game and then they have a mechanic and I'm like, "Oh my god, that's fucking genius. I got to have that
yes,
in my game even though it doesn't make sense in Cyberpunk. I got to somehow make sense of it."
yes, absolutely. So yeah, I imagine eventually we'll talk about it, but like there's task chains, which I had discovered while playing Star Wars, and I was like, oh my god, I fucking love this approach. It's so cool. And then I've seen it in you know Star Trek Adventures and other games, and I was reading Mothership here, and they have something quite a bit like it, and it's just having those different ways to pull it out and put it into place, and um, or just on the fly stuff, because we know players do crazy things and they come up with crazy ideas. It's part of the reason we like it. And so sometimes you just have to come up with something on the fly, and having sort of a toolkit available to you from other games, from other experiences, from what other GMs and players do is really helpful to kind of whip those out and say, all right, yeah, that's what we'll do in this situation. So I think it's great that you did that to James, because I'm sure he's done it too, and
Yeah.
you got to, but they work within the situation, or sometimes
Yeah.
they don't, but you learn from it. So
Well, see, he was like, it was partially like it wasn't me trying to be like, oh, check out what I can do. Not even. It was just like, this is what I'm used to. This is what I'm accustomed to. Like, if something comes up, I let the dice tell the story sometimes. Because if we come to an impasse and we're like trying to figure out what's the right thing to do, what's the best way to tackle this situation, I let the dice do the talking. And maybe there's a mechanic that's in the book. Either I don't remember it or I feel like it's not in depth enough. And we'll get more into that later because we have some notes of stuff we want to talk to. So I just come up with something that I feel like will add flavor to the gameplay.
yeah. Well, and yeah, I hate pausing to look up a rule in a
Oh my
book
god, the worst.
and
Yeah.
during the game. Yeah, even if I'm pretty sure it's in there, I will often just not worry about it in the session. I'll go with what I think it is, or make something up on the fly, and then I'll go back and check the rules after the game session and say, oh, okay, I got it right or I got it wrong, and then go correct it with the players, next time around as I need to. But
Yeah.
I really just want to keep the flow of the game going, and not worry too much about the rules during it. So, which is easier once you get used to some of the game, but and try to have some of the big ones down, combat and some of those major rules pretty hard. But yeah, no, it's everyone has to do it. So whether it's a heavy crunch game or a rules light game, you're going to be making stuff up on the fly to deal with the situation. So
Yeah, I'm always like, I agree completely with everything you said. I'm always like, unless it kills the players, like whatever is happening, then we can just figure it out. And if we have to retroactively be like, oh, actually, I would have had this much money and this would have had, fine, we'll just retroactively do whatever we got to do to make it work. But like you said, if we could just move it along, especially a game like Cyberpunk, it's an action-packed kind of like a comic book action John Woo movie thing. You don't want to sit there and think like, oh, what range is this pistol at medium range? Just like, dude, it's medium range. Let's go, Yeah. So.
Yeah. Roll the dice, go with it. Yeah, absolutely. And, and sometimes it is fun just to have, like, okay, you've reached an impasse, roll some dice. I'll do that sometimes in a game I run with The Witcher, which is by R. Talsorian as well. They'll walk into a place and they'll be like, well, how much is here? And I'm like, roll some dice. Let's just see how much is there. Just like, we'll figure it out. Just play. Or, a set of luck dice, just roll some,
yeah.
If you get 51 or better, that kind of stuff. And, and then I sometimes just subject them to rolls just to make them think something's going on.
I love that.
Always fun too.
I love that. Sometimes I'll be like, wait 1 second, and then I'll roll dice and I'll go, ooh, okay, all right, let's keep going.
Yes. Yes.
So I love doing stuff like that. I've always thought that nothing should limit you from playing. If you don't have dice, you should still have some kind of way to play. If you don't have a pen and paper, you should still have some kind of way to play. And I've always thought to myself, like, especially with this whole virtual tabletop stuff going on, I got to have a battle map. I got to have the tokens. And then the more experience I got, I realized, like, oh, you don't really need anything. All that stuff is just supposed to be there to enhance the game.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. What, all the way back, so age, I was playing back in the 80s, Traveler and stuff like that. I'm a terrible artist. I can't draw.
Oh man, anything. Me too.
But we just sat there, made stories up in our head, occasionally took something down, wrote it on paper, just kind of give a thing, nowhere near a decent enough mat. But yeah, you don't even need dice. Like I said, like you can, I'm going to shoot this, and it goes in the thing, you succeed. If you don't, oh well, good, too bad. I mean, yeah, there's so much ways you could do it. So, yeah.
You just gave me an idea of what if it would be cool if you had like a dartboard and you like threw darts, because that's like there's a little bit of skill involved with that. So it's like you have some skill and kind of like luck because you're not a dart player maybe. So that would be fun.
If you don't hit the bullseye, your character dies.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, unless that's a critical success, if anything, hitting the bullseye, right? Yeah. It's amazing how there's so many tabletop RPGs and they all use the same dice, but you get a completely different game, completely different experience just from the way that they handle the dice mechanics. Like, I was looking at your game, the two games that you're working on. Do you want to plug them now or do you want to wait? No, yeah, you talked about them publicly. Tell people the games that you're working on.
Yeah. So one is called After the Machines, which is an OSR inspired rules light game. It's like 60 pages on 8.5 folded over kind of size, heavily inspired by New York Board and Mothership. And then the other one is more of a classic, grim, dark fantasy, Shards of a Shattered Moon. So more of a medium kind of crunch, but kind of what you would expect if you were, picking up a cyberpunk book or The Witcher or D&D or something like that. So both of those. So those are the games we're making. So.
Yeah, and so one of your dice mechanics, at least in Shattered Moon, I saw this. I'm not sure if it's the same in After the Machines, but basically you keep it really simple by using your dice, and then there's like a number that you have to surpass. On the Shattered Moons, it was like 5-ups are all successes, right? Is that what it is? Yeah. So 5-ups are all successes, and that means you start with a D6. And if you get a D8 or a D10 or a D12, it's still 5-up only, and that's what makes you skillful, is because you upgraded to that higher dice, higher probability of succeeding. I thought it was such a genius way to make it happen, and it's so much easier to remember.
Yeah, well, I was first doing it, I was like, do I do a target number, and try to do over a target number and kind of putting it together. But then I was like, I was getting really finicky with it. And I was like, you know what? It's too hard. Let's just make it a certain number of successes to kind of do a die. So in shards of Shadow, it's a dice pool mechanic, just get up above a certain amount and you need so many successes. For after the machines, I try to even go simpler. Like, you roll one die unless you got a disadvantage or an advantage, and the target difficulty is a number. You just try to roll above that and kind of add in the skill. But yeah, I mean, it depending on how people use the dice. I mean, it definitely adds a lot of variation, right? Like, whenever I introduce players who have played Cyberpunk before, they're always shocked at how much critical successes and failures happen.
Yeah,
like
10%.
Yeah, 10% of the time. They're used to a D20 a lot of the times where it's a lot, half that. One out of every 20 times, so 5% chance. So and so they're like, whoa, but it adds a lot of different, interest to it, and I think that's what gives Cyberpunk, in many ways, it's kind of like over the top feel, because stuff's going bad a lot more often, and stuff is going really well a lot more often, and it just kind of rides into that. So, I like particularly in Cyberpunk how they did the critical double the damage with the rolling 2 6s.
Oh yeah, that's a critical injury chart.
Yes,
yeah.
I was like, oh, that is smart, cool.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
So, and it's very natural to when you're rolling that dice, 2 6s, boom, boom, yes.
And so the probabilities go higher the more powerful your weapon is, which is an awesome. Like, I love mechanics that make sense. So like just like your dice mechanic, like the more expert you are, the higher your D number will be, D6, D8, whatever. Theirs is like, if your weapon is more powerful, it does more D6 damage, and that's a higher likelihood of rolling 2 6s, and then you get that critical injury chart. It's fucking great. Yes. I love that.
Yeah, and it falls into that simplicity. It just it helps you when you're gaming it to not, you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to think, oh wait, how much is the critical damage on rate as its uses. I sometimes like those, but you just roll it, you see it, and it's really satisfying too to get the two.
It feels really good.
2 6s popping up on it.
Yeah.
So
I'd imagine that I'd imagine that upgrading your dice too, like you're at a D8 and you get a D10 or a D12. Oh my god, that's gonna feel so good too.
Yeah. Well, and one of the, and I have a bunch of dice, and I wish, I like to use the different dice, right? Sometimes with, I play a lot of Traveler, and it's just D6s, which is great. But, boy, I've got that D8, I've got that D10. I want to use that D12. How often do you get to use that sucker?
I know. I'm the same. That's what I liked about D&D, is you get to use all kinds of different dice. But I understand the simplicity that Talsorian's going for with just 2 dice. That's also really cool too.
Yeah. Well, they make good use of it, and you still get to have fun with the dice, and then they make cool dice, right? You get the cool D6s and D10s that those Cyberpunk dice.
Well, yeah, we were talking about 10% chance to fumble in Cyberpunk, and in Cyberpunk 2020, they had a fumble chart. They had like something that you would roll on if you fumbled. And they got away from that in Red because I believe 10% is really high to like almost kill your character, to potentially put your character in death range. And I totally get it. I understand it. But there was something fun about rolling a 1 and then having to roll on this other chart and be like, okay, what's going to happen to me now? Or like in D&D, they have that chaos magic where
Oh yeah.
you roll on a D100 chart and you're like, oh man, what's gonna happen?
Yes. Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's gonna take us to our first topic, which is fumble charts. So, like I said, Cyberpunk does not have currently a fumble chart. So, what do you think? What do you think should be on a fumble chart for Cyberpunk Red?
So I think it probably depends on kind of what role you're normally thinking about. So the first place I went to with a fumble chart was in firing a gun or using a weapon. That's where my first place went. But you could also do stuff with like fail a stealth check or something like that. But I went to weapon and I was just like, oh, okay. So what would you do on a fumble chart like that? And you could have a range of stuff. Like, I went with like, oh, your gun jams, which they do have like a critical failure one, which it causes a malfunction.
If
but
your
you can add
weapon is a poor quality weapon, if you roll a 1, then you have to roll a weapons tech roll of like beating some DV. I don't remember the exact target number, but that would unjam your gun, or else you have to waste an action doing it next turn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then you could also like, you run out of ammo. Like, your clip all of a sudden runs out. Or you didn't realize you had enough bullets in it, or you drop it.
Ooh, that's good. Yeah, that's good. The whole like, oh, you unluckily brought a magazine that only had 3 rounds in it, like you fucked up when you were preparing, and that's like part of the fumble. I love that kind of stuff too, 100%.
Yeah. Or you could get like extreme, right? Like, boy, not only did you just fumble, but you just shot one of your buddies.
Yeah. See, the cool thing about a fumble chart is if I just say, oh, you shot one of your buddies, the player's gonna be like, dude, what the fuck? Like, because they know I made that up. So that's like a what the fuck. But if it's on a chart, then it's like, oh, this is out of my hands, dude. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And you've left the rule to them usually, right? They're like, oh, you fumbled. Well, roll that D10, and I just shot. So yeah, no, I agree. And that is a I agree. It's completely good use of a fumble chart because it does sort of make it feel less like GM fiat is picking on somebody, and instead it's a that kind of thing. And in some ways you don't even need a fumble chart, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could, if somebody fumbles, you could just say, okay, roll a D10, 1 through 5, and you could just kind of lay down the law right then and there. It's still their roll.
Yeah.
They still know what the consequences are of the roll, but they rolled the 10 that, they slipped and fell, which is another thing you can add to a fumble chart. You slip and fall, you get knocked prone, for some reason. So
the idea is that like, okay, the lowest probability thing happened, right? You rolled a 1, and now let's see if the lowest probability thing happens again in a row. And if it does, then that's like the severity of the bad thing that happens to you. Because I like putting on the fumble chart that like everything, one of the options is like everything is normal. You fumbled, but you recovered, luckily. Yes. But then I also like putting on the fumble chart like you completely fucked up. The grenade landed on your feet. You shot your friend, or whatever the hell it is, double damage to your friend, some crazy shit like that.
Because I think in a lot of their charts in 2020, and I know in The Witcher they still have the fumble charts. Mm-hmm. There is like 1 through 5, nothing happened. Other than just the bad luck and the mess up that you had where you really missed with your gun or with your swing of your katana. Mm-hmm. Then they expand that to increase the range, and usually the higher you go, the smaller the chances of rolling. They may just make the 10, like you shoot your buddy accidentally.
Yep.
8, 9, maybe your gun melts in your hand. Good luck finding another one.
Exactly.
It kind of being able to tailor that, particularly if you're like rolling a D10 where, a 1 in 10 chance for everything. So if you want to increase the odds of something happening, you spread it across a couple of points on that die and make it, that way shooting your
Exactly.
buddies 1 in 10 chance, 1 to 5, 50% chance nothing bad
Yeah,
happens.
yeah. That way it seems like you're being more fair and less of like targeting your players and trying to screw them over. I do always still, every time I do like a homebrew, I always feel like the players are going to judge me if something bad happens to them because they're like, dude, you made up this rule and now like my character is permanent. Only some of the players are like that. Others are like, I'm along for the ride, whatever happens,
Yeah.
it's all good. How do you deal with that?
Um, you know, they, I make sure they understand the consequences if they pick up the die and when they roll it. And unless there's a mechanic that says you can re-roll something, or spend luck or whatever, and I kind of leave it in their hands. But I make it clear, hey, this is what's going to happen, and that's their chance to protest, right? If I'm making something up on the fly, and they're like, man, shooting my buddy seems way too extreme. All right,
Yeah.
maybe we tailor it back a little bit. Maybe we stick with it, roll the die. But once you roll the die, you're committed to whatever happens. And there's only a certain amount that you can, avoid. I mean, that's part of the reason rolling the die. It's this chance action that happens. Um, and I definitely try not to kill characters. Like
Yeah. I hate it. I
purposely.
honestly hate it. I hate it, but I understand that it's completely necessary.
Yeah, yeah. And unless the game is really grim, gritty, and dark, where they're going in and perhaps they are going to die. Like,
Yeah, it's like understood that, like Call of Cthulhu is one of those, right? That it's like if every investigator dies, you know that it was a great game.
yeah. You're going to go insane or you're going to die. One
Yeah.
of the two, and that's the way it's supposed to be. So
I hear that and I'm intrigued. I heard Traveler's a lot like that too. It's like you do all this amazing character generation and then like the first planet you land on, something just murders you.
Well, it can be that way if you got a GM that wants to do that to you. Or I would say Traveler is, if you don't play it smart, it requires you to be not run into fight everything, because typically you don't have great armor. Typically the guns are really dangerous, and typically your stats aren't, you start taking wounds directly in the stats. So in Traveler,
Oh yeah, that's right. I heard about that.
Dex and your stamina, you get hit, you start losing those, and as they drop, that's a weapon that causes 3d6 damage can like really hurt you, especially if you don't have any armor. So,
yeah.
So yeah, but it forces you to think about situations and try not necessarily to run in and violence and take it out. In some games want you to operate that way. It's it is a fight them. I mean, what that's a superhero.
Yeah.
Why in a superhero game you want to go and fight? You want to go beat up the bad guys and you want to knock them through walls and crap like that.
Yeah.
So those tend to be less lethal because that's the way you want it. But
Exactly.
so the fumble charts in those would be kind of interesting, right? Building comes down and it threatens an innocent civilian. So the superhero has to make the decision between those kinds of things, which is a great thing that you can do with fumble charts as well. You can kind of, if you don't want to make it directly about, so in Cyberpunk, if we were making a fumble chart that wasn't directly about what happens to the weapon, it could be about what happens to the environment around the characters that forces them to make decisions. That you shoot something and you miss and you hit the gas tank.
Yeah.
Or this flammable thing over here, or you set something ablaze, or so you can start to really kind of introduce those kinds of things that maybe aren't immediately affecting those kind of, maybe that's how you deal with some of those players too, that kind of like, that's arbitrary, you just why you hurting me. Well, okay, I didn't hurt you, boy, what are you going to do about that fire you just set?
Exactly. I feel like that stuff is so fun though, and I love the idea of changing the environment. It's like adding another variable to the scenario because you fumbled. So like really you're just adding to the story and the narrative. And let me ask you this, if you were to implement a fumble chart in your games, would you sit there and like make fumble charts? Like, for example, Cyberpunk Red, maybe I would make a fumble chart for each category of skills, like social, driving, combat, and make it make sense and then implement that in my game. Or would you just have something that you do on the fly, which is what I usually do? I just think, okay, you're driving, you rolled a 1, you're out of gas. You know what I mean? Like those common sense kind of like what's the lowest probability thing that could happen that's like 1 in a million chance or whatever that could totally screw you over, and then I try to go with that as like the answer.
Yeah. On the games I GM, I tend to come up with them on the fly.
Yeah.
And because I don't want to go and create a chart for every single skill possibility.
Yeah.
But it's fun to create them and think about the mechanisms and the challenges that you can introduce with those fumbles. And also because it can be contextual.
Yeah.
So why make a stealth fumble chart that may work in a warehouse but may not work in a condominium or a corporate office where you want to be able to introduce some of those other things. So I tend to make them on the fly as well, and I probably would. I think some things kind of make sense, like a weapon or those kind of things, because you can kind of build those in. Those are going to be consistent, kind of over and over.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I kind of make them up on the fly. I think for the Shards of the Shattered Moon, I've been making a streetwise fumble chart.
Oh, that's genius.
If they're engaged in streetwise checks, I was like, okay, well, what can go wrong here? And all of a sudden, a bunch of baddies that have been chasing the group show up, and like, hey, we caught up with you, and
or like, hey, why are you going around asking questions, asking about our gang? You know what I mean? Who the fuck are you? Like this and that.
Yeah, that and getting false information.
Yeah,
like something that gives you completely false information. So rather than it just being like misleading, it's like it's way wrong.
Yeah,
it's going to send you into a wrong place, which is kind of fun to watch players like. Because they often go on their own story and they kind of give them a false one and they kind of like go down the rabbit hole with that. And you're like,
yeah. It's so tough to get your players to not metagame in that situation because they know they failed and you give them information and the player knows like this is completely fucking false. So unless I like make them secretly roll without telling them what's going on, it's really difficult to tell them like actually give them false information and see them fuck things up royally because of the false information. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I like sometimes to keep the target number hidden.
Mm-hmm. I always do.
Or uncertain rolls. Making they don't exactly know what the outcome, and they may know if they're on the extreme, like I really failed, which kind of matches like when like you're running up the stairs and you trip and fall on your face, right? But you may not know that you didn't quite get up there fast enough, and there's some uncertainty in that. So I really like uncertain dice mechanics, but yeah. So back to it. I make them up on the fly too.
Yeah, 100%. I was also going to ask you, I mean, we're like going off on just fumble charts. Like, apparently we could do a podcast on just fumble charts. So I was going to ask you, and please, for the viewers and listeners, I'm not sure what's going on with, it could be my connection, but we're like losing you in and out, Patrick, every now and then. It gets like cursed pixelated. But it's fine. Please excuse us. The information's coming anyway. All right. I was gonna ask you. Sometimes I'll have my players, like in the gas example. I said, okay, you're out of gas, but then I give them kind of a little bit of a way out by letting them roll again on some other skill check or something to soften the blow. So in the situation where the player ran out of gas, I told them roll a d10, and if the result is under your luck stat, then you luckily have a can of gas in your trunk that will get you to the gas station. So you're still out of gas and you still need to get gas, but you're no longer stranded if you pass that lucky check. Do you think that's a great way to add to the narrative, or is that just like you're giving them a parachute?
No, I think it's a great way to add to the narrative. I like those kinds of things. It gives them an opportunity again to sort of kind of do it. Sometimes I might even give them an out and say, give me 3 luck points and you happen to have a gas can.
Oh, yeah.
Give them a little bit of cost there. But I don't have any problem with kind of giving them an out in that way. But you aren't giving them a complete parachute. They still have to go someplace. They still have to do something.
Exactly.
They still suffered a negative consequence. They still have to deal with it. And you are just kind of mitigating it a little bit and still leaving it to some.
I think we talked enough about fumble charts, huh? I think we covered the full gambit of fumble charts. The verdict on my end is make it up on the fly. If you're going to do a fumble chart, and actually, I would say a D6 or D10 chart is all you need. Don't do a D100, don't do a D20 or any of that. Just make short and simple if you're not going to make it on the fly. What do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. No need to go nuts. D10, D6 will be plenty to give you that range of options that you need. So,
yeah. Okay. All right. Let's talk about this other subject I wanted to talk to you. Let me buy you a drink, a mechanic for softening NPCs for information. So I was thinking it would be cool because almost any game that I've ever played, it's always been opposing rolls. It's been I roll on my persuasion skill and they roll on their being able to take a persuasion skill. And if I'm better than theirs, then they got to do whatever the hell I tell them. But that doesn't really account for how like social interactions really work. Social interactions are like everyone's usually guarded at first. You got to soften them up, get past some barriers, and then once they feel like they can trust you, then they can give you some information. Or if they feel like it could benefit them, then that's how it is. And I don't feel like opposing roles really do that kind of thing justice. So I was thinking it would be pretty cool if there was some kind of mechanic where you do like a series of rolls or a series of something. I don't exactly have the answer, but the idea is to soften up the NPC to make sense of the whole persuasion thing. So what do you think on that subject?
Yeah, no, it's definitely it can be a bit crude in some ways, just to have like persuasion, opposing persuasion roll. So I very much like the fact that it can take a little bit of time to soften up somebody, and it may be a series of rolls, right? It may be a persuasion roll to get them to even talk to you, and then it might be a stealth roll to slip them a drink, or hey, a stealth roll of making sure they drink 5 drinks while you only have 1, so that you keep your wits, they lose their wits, or a variety of and I think it's good to mix skills into that. Hey, use your persuasion check, use a straight up will check or a cool check to help get them to know you. And you can put in like a threshold. So depending on the type of goon, so using your 3 goon method, which is fantastic. If you're trying to soften up an easy goon, it's going to be easier. Right. So it shouldn't take as much. It should probably be fairly simple. But trying to soften up an elite person, that's going to take some effort. It's going to take a bit of time. It's going to and more risk of failure, and that kind of thing.
Also, it should be that like I said, they're already guarded, and if you come at them and you fail, it should be so much more difficult, exponentially more difficult, to be able to get anything out of them after that. Not like
Yes.
come back in an hour and do another persuasion or something like that. Now they know, like, oh, you're a suspicious person now because you were trying to get some information from me.
Yeah. Either you lower, apply a penalty to their roll. So you say, oh, now you failed that first time, you got a -4 now next time, or you increase the difficulty value. You say, okay, it was a 13, now it's a 16. Good luck with that, or whatever that is that you're trying to do. You apply those conditions to what happens. So yeah, absolutely, because again, it has consequences, right? They're engaged in something, they try it, doesn't quite work out. Yeah, it's not come back and just do it again. These people have memories, and think for themselves. So
yeah. What I usually do, like Cyberpunk has 2 skills that I feel like are not utilized that much, but you have to have it in the game: wardrobe and style, and personal grooming. These are 2 skills that like you probably wouldn't figure out the nuance of it off the top of your head, but I've been implementing it as like, okay, first I want player agency, so I want them to tell me, what are you wearing before you walk into this nightclub, let's say.
yeah,
So they tell me how they're dressed, how they look, and if I think that how they're dressed and how they look fits with the place that they're going to, I'll give them a positive modifier to their wardrobe and style and their personal grooming. And if they do well on that roll, then it's like, okay, you belong here. And if you want to try to like, we've done the softening of the NPCs. All the NPCs are softened because you look like you belong here. But if they fail, or I gave them negative modifiers and then they fail, then it's going to be extremely difficult for them to talk to NPCs or anything like that.
I like that a lot. Yeah, I like that a lot, because that adds that. It does use those skills, and gives them a sort of value within the game, other than kind of like a cool factor. And you can make really interesting adjustments. Like, you're going to go meet with a Biotechnica Corpo. It's going to have a different wardrobe, personal grooming thing than a Valentino gang member. And how that works. And oftentimes that's just about like being aware of who you're interacting with and trying to use that skill to implement and make them comfortable. So it fits completely with that. I really like that. That's really cool.
Yeah, I've just been trying to figure out ways to soften NPCs and really to utilize some of the skills that I don't readily understand, like how I would use that, other than you wake up in the morning and you brush your teeth. Okay, personal grooming. Like, yeah, that's the obvious choice. But how can we use this skill to benefit us during regular gameplay is what I usually think when I look at stuff like that.
Yeah, because that's really cool. Because I was definitely heading towards the kind of interaction with. Maybe my players do it a lot, where they try to drug or get NPCs drunk to get them to reveal information.
Yeah, that's smart.
And but I always try to say, well, but you can go too far, right? You get them too drunk, they're going to be unhelpful. So you're actually trying to hit kind of a sweet spot, keep yourself sober enough to do it. So, and I was looking at the skills for that in Cyberpunk, and I was like, you know what? I think it's a conversation. That's the conversation skill, where you're kind of engaging in conversation with them, and you're using that skill as just sort of you're keeping things going, you're keeping things flowing. I would use the stealth skill to say, you're not taking as much, you're really nursing that drink and keeping them going. And a fumble in that case, or a critical failure, would be, oh, they went over the edge, or they're really close to being over the edge, and
Or they just
they pass out.
they saw you drop that pill in their drink.
Yes, yeah,
Oof.
yeah. Either way, and all of a sudden there's 4 goons right there next to you. So so adding that to the tactics of what they do, and of course that's all what you do with the wardrobe, doing that kind of thing is all made up on the fly. It's just sort of using the skills that are there and kind of applying a bit of logic to how a social situation would come out. But I also think it adds fun to it. It doesn't make it tedious, but it also doesn't make it just a single check, which, sometimes, yeah, maybe, yeah, do I persuade that person? Okay, fine, blah, blah. But really sort of having a scene, it's not just going to be one persuasion check. It's going to be a series of checks, a series of things. So, and you could combine both. Hey, how's my wardrobe look? And then that's going to make it easier to approach them. You can have all sorts of, because at least in a lot of movies I see, the head honcho is protected by a phalanx of guards. You have to get through them, and persuade them to say, okay, yeah, you can do it. You can go talk to, Big Joe over there. Yeah, it's I'm gonna steal that idea.
Yeah, steal it, man.
Make use of those skills.
I'm gonna definitely steal your idea of getting the NPCs drunk. That's such a smart thing. I don't know why I never thought about that. Drugging them against their will.
I think it's the players, man. It's like, oh wait, let's get them drunk.
I love it. I love it when they come up with shit like that. It's the best. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I was thinking. Yeah, I think we hit the nail on the head on that. Adding any kind of like tedious mechanic would take away from what we're really trying to do. And we're also rewarding players that are making characters that have fluff in them and more like focused on what this kind of character would be. And they take skills like a 10 in wardrobe and style, which like you'll probably never use. But if you're playing in my game, you have a super good advantage at going to that nightclub because now your persuasion roll will have more effect than somebody else's.
Yeah. It presents alternative options for using those skills, which opens it up for them to make use of them and for other players to potentially recognize, hey, maybe I should invest in some of that instead of just going for, shoulder firearms, and at least in the games I like to run, I will go sessions without fighting in combat.
Yeah.
And I want them to be using and engaging with those skills. I want them to be able to roll some dice and kind of see how things come out. And so ensuring that there are situations for that and then enabling their creativity to come through, but still provide that element of risk, which is always a part of that die roll.
Yep. Yeah. You need tension and you need the possibility of failure. Those are the things. Combat does that too because the possibility of failure could kill you. The tension is the combat. But in a social interaction or normal skill checks and stuff like that, the tension is if I fail this, then we're not going to be able to complete the mission. We're going to totally fuck things up. And then eventually it'll lead to our death if we totally ruin things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So
absolutely.
I like that. Definitely, I think the verdict is to enhance persuasion checks and interacting with NPCs. It's good to add secondary, tertiary mechanics that are probably part of the game that will add flavor and give your players a chance of feeling like they have more of a chance doing other skills and stuff like that.
Yes. Rock solid. In full agreement.
Okay, perfect. All right, let's talk about the next thing that I've been doing in my games, I've been implementing, and it's something you see a lot in wargaming, which is morale checks. Morale checks, so the idea is there's this great horror story that my buddy would always tell me, where him and his buddies were ambushed by like 12 wolves in like some kind of fantasy game that they were playing. and it was a nightmare game master that they had. And the game master, these wolves were fighting to the last wolf. Like there was 3 left from the 12, and the players brought it up and said, "Hey, dude, we just killed like I don't even like 8, 9 wolves. Like these 3 guys are literally just gonna fight to the death." And the GM was like, "Yeah, they're fighting to the death," which is a very video game thing idea, but the reality and realism, and if we want to feel the immersion, there's chances where the NPCs and the PCs will need to run away from combat to save their lives. So let me ask you, how do you implement morale checks in combat? Do you just base it on a situation by situation basis, or do you tell yourself like before combat, like, all right, if half of these guys are dead and all the players are alive, then the other half have to do some kind of mechanic to figure out if they're still going to fight?
Yeah, I've done it. I do it typically 2 different ways. One way is I just try to imagine what the NPCs and how they would respond are. So, for example, those wolves, pack of wolves, I probably would, after they got hurt bad enough or lost enough, I would have them flee and just kind of turn tail and run. So that you can kind of just do that. I think that's absolutely rational and reasonable, and also thinking about whatever the beast villain is and how they would react. And I've also used actual morale checks, and where you may have a leader and then a group of people. So I was running a game with a bunch of Neckers in the Witcher, and they had a leader, and I made it so that when the Neckers they killed enough of them, they had to make a kind of a morale check or they would start to flee. And I made it much more difficult for them if the leader got killed. Yep. And so that morale check became, if the leader got killed once, they had an instant morale check to see if they would just turn tail and run. And if they didn't, it just got a lot harder for them to make it as they keep going down. And eventually they just break and they run. Yeah. So I do it both ways. But I think it's an important element of it. Unless you got like a cyber psycho or something that just won't stop, they all have a breaking point at some point in time.
Yeah, I think it's okay to let the players decide when they want to run away and not like leave it to any dice mechanics or anything like that, because you're taking away their agency. But as far as NPCs go, yeah, you're totally right. If a leader goes down, everybody's got to decide, is this worth it? Is this worth dying for? If there's other mitigating factors like they're inebriated, on drugs, cyber psycho, maybe those things are factors that will keep them in the fight because they're not in their right mind. And even though it's not in Cyberpunk Red, what I usually do is I take the will stat, which is another one of those stats that people are kind of like don't understand how it works. I tell them if these NPCs roll a D10 and the result is under their will stat, then they stay in the fight. And then there will be modifiers. Like I totally forgot about the whole leader thing, because Warhammer does that perfectly. It's their sergeant or their leader dies and everybody's leadership drops and they're more likely to run away. So that's a great idea. I would probably add some kind of modifier to that will check to see if they're going to stay in the fight. Or alternatively, I would just make the decision that these guys would run away no matter what I roll or anything like that.
Yeah, I wrote down it's fundamentally a willpower check in Cyberpunk, and I might go at it from saying they have to roll a 14 or 15 or a certain level, so they roll a d10, add their willpower.
Sure.
So either way, I think is valid. And one of the things I was thinking of as I was thinking about the topic for this is differences in kind of leaders, right? So again, I was thinking about your 3 goon method. Mm-hmm. If there are 4 easy goons and they're getting beat up, they might actually be less likely to flee if it's just 4 easy goons versus they're in with a veteran goon who gets their leader who gets knocked down.
Yep.
That might induce more panic into them because they were being led, and boy, wow, he just got taken out. So that's bad. And then I thought, you know what? What if it was like 4 easy goons and an elite, and that elite went down? They'd probably turn tail and run immediately.
Yeah, 100%.
Because that guy got taken down. So even adding sort of differences in how they're being led can do it. But so I agree. PCs, they make their own decisions.
Mm-hmm.
They unless they occasionally may throw in a critical fumble again where they may like dive prone, they kind of panic. I give them an out. That's typically where I give them an out, like roll willpower to recover or something like that. NPCs, most of them have a breaking point. I'd probably use the give me a 15 or 17 and then stack up. Okay, you've got an elite leader there. He's still in the fight. Makes it a little bit easier for the goons, the lower level goons, to stay in. He goes out. He gets unconscious. When the king went down in the medieval battlefields, the armies broke. I mean, that was usually a symbol for it's over. Save your own skin, kind of situation.
And then there was also the factor that like some people wanted to run away, but they couldn't because they were in a situation where like they can't run away, so they have to fight for their life even if they want to. So throwing that also, it might be like another headache to think about, but I feel like that helps with the immersion.
Yeah, it adds an interesting story element that you could even potentially tie in with somebody being like, no, I had to, you gave me an escape opportunity, and so I took it. But yeah, I mean, as a GM, that's easy enough for us to kind of come into play, and we're adding to our own things that we're keeping track of. We're not necessarily having to follow what a book tells us. So, if we want to take that on, I think that's perfectly fine. So,
yeah. I've also noticed that homebrew ideas come to me more often the more I play Cyberpunk and the more I'm like an expert of the rules. The more expertise I have of like the basics and even the like more than the fundamentals, then I start feeling more comfortable throwing in stuff that I typically wouldn't have on the first game playing,
Yeah, well, because I think you've got a sense of what the rules are kind of capable of, kind of where their stretching points are. You have a little bit more comfort in what the skills are, what they do, what's not being used, kind of how to bring them in. Understand whether it's an opposed, hey, should that be an opposed check, or is that just going to be against a straight DV value?
Yeah.
Or just to get, like you do sometimes, just roll a D10 if it's under your willpower. Cool. If not, you got a bit of a problem. I think so, because you've learned the system. You know how to hack it better, which is essentially what homebrew and these on the roll fly. So knowing the system makes it easier.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and sometimes in Cyberpunk, I've rewarded my players for running away because everybody's first instinct is to stay in the fight and be a superhero and kill everyone before we move on. But there's been times where the players shocked me and they were like, dude, why would we stay and fight? We're definitely going to die. And they would just run away. And I'm like, well, I have to reward you for that because that's the right answer.
Yeah. You're not going to win every fight. Pick your fights, find another solution to the problem. Because you can award them with some valuable information, some way to help solve the problem in a different way. I like that. It's good. It kind of reminds me of my Star Wars players who avoid a starship fight.
Wow!
I've tried to get them into one, and they're like, no, they run away.
Come on. You didn't want to say red alert, shields up, red alert. Come on, man. Who doesn't want to say that?
They're like, it's deadly. No way. We're not doing this.
Oh, that's funny, dude. That's funny. All right. Well, do you have any subjects that you wanted to bring up, or should we save them for another episode?
Yeah, I think we save them for another episode.
Let's do it. Let's do it. I think this was a very successful episode, and we touched on a lot of things that I feel like is in the community. People are, especially like the fumble chart and morale checks. Those are two things that I've seen the community talking about.
Mm.
I guess closing out for the future of this show, what can we talk about as far as what you should be looking for in a homebrew? What should a homebrew be facilitating? You know, is doing homebrew sometimes detrimental to the game? Does it ruin the game if you're adding too much to the chaos? Or should you be taking a less is more approach? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think you want to tailor it for your particular game and party that you're working with. And that way you can come up with some homebrew that may work from a play group to a play group, but it also enables you to create a homebrew that ties into those characters. So definitely homebrew can hurt a game if you are being too regimented about it, or you're violating sort of the rules like as written, and your players are expecting you to follow the rules as written, or you're using it to just be, kind of a jerk as a GM.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, no, I think I definitely think there's a balance that you're trying to achieve with that. So, and then some games are going to ask you to do more. I mean, if you go into some of those rules light game, you're going to be making more up on the fly as you go along. You're essentially home brewing rules constantly. But yeah, I think that's a good topic to have.
Yeah, and I feel like it also, you touched on a very important thing where it's like you don't want to pull the rug under your players, and be like, oh yeah, here's something that you have no idea about. I didn't tell you about at all. I didn't warn you about it, but all of a sudden I'm giving you this D6 chart that could kill your character out of nowhere. You know what I mean? So you definitely don't want to do that. You want to set expectations, read your party, read your group, know if they're okay with stuff like this, run it by them. Maybe they'll even give you good ideas for the fumble chart. And that way, if they're involved, then you don't feel bad about the things that happen, because it's like they added to the creativity.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And yeah, I mean, look, us bouncing around a few ideas came up with some other ideas. So
I know.
That a few people got a lot of ideas that you can come up with. So
I know, it's honestly this is the kind of shit that I could just sit and talk about for hours. And I knew you're the same kind of guy. That's why I wanted to do this with you, because I'm like, anybody that makes games sits down with a Bud Light or a Miller Lite and goes like, dude, wouldn't it be cool if we rolled a D6 and this happened and that happened?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, well, and I go with be like, that is a cool critical injury. Oh, that is a cool fumble. How do I get that? Kind of hack other games to hack a different game. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I saw that in After the Machines. I saw the inspiration that you had. It's great, and it works perfect with that grim dark setting of After the Machine.
Yeah.
So
I'm really proud of the critical injury where you piss your pants.
Dude, there's some gnarly ones there, man. Yeah, it's good. There's also I also wanted to say that I think some games facilitate homebrew way better than other games, and some of them even expect you to do some degree of homebrew and not follow the rules completely. There's even some Talsorian books that I've read from Cyberpunk that literally part of the foreword or the introduction was like, hey, if there's a rule you don't like, ignore it, change it, skip it, whatever you got to do to have fun. But then there's games like, is it up here? Oh, here, this game. Games like Starfinder.
Oh, yeah.
That, I mean, you could homebrew, But dude, there's so many goddamn rules for every goddamn thing that you can do in this game that it's like just go along for the ride and just forget about trying to hack it, all right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, those rules heavy games like Starfinder or Pathfinder, it's actually harder to hack it because
Yeah.
they've written it, you've kind of like either they've already written a rule.
Exactly.
And,
There's a mechanic.
Somebody already knows about it and is going to tell you. Or because it's so crunchy, it's hard to balance it right. So, so yeah, I think a game like Cyberpunk, or like Forbidden Land, some of the Free League Year Zero games are really sort of in that middle spot of like, it's not, you're making up everything, but there's a lot you can do. And which, people are, they got all upset that, there weren't like 1,000 different types of guns in Cyberpunk. They went and created stuff. It's like, well, hey, go for it. If it was more than flavor and it was actual mechanics, that they basically hacked it and it works. And I actually like the part with the tech ability, the crafting ability, where they say, look, right here, that you could really break balance here. Which I think is also an interesting topic. Like how, like to me, balance isn't all that important.
Especially if the balance doesn't hurt the players. Like if it's a balance issue that will definitely significantly damage the players, then it's something that you want to take a look at and be careful of. But if it's something that adds to the story and doesn't really affect the players being alive or dead, then why not? Just give it a shot.
Yeah. And I think that's the other part is like, they've got that in there and it says you may have to go retrofit it. I don't know how many times I've messed up a rule in The Witcher with these guys. I've gone back and said, yeah, okay, it was there, and we got it wrong. Luckily, it was all in your favor because I tend to default to player favor as well. So we're going to make sure from here on we're playing it this way and, and kind of do it. But you got to feel like you can fail like that and it be okay. That it's not going to break the game that you failed or something like that from a botched rule.
Yeah, exactly. And that's especially that last thing you said, have fun. We're not all game designers. We're not all like mathematicians, statisticians, or whatever. And we're not always going to have the right answer at the moment. But I think that everybody should take risks for the sake of fun and having a cool time and doing a cool thing with your characters, because that's the stuff that you'll remember for a lifetime, not whether you made the DV roll to hit the guy that was like 8 squares away or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
that's it.
Yeah.
No. So, please go ahead. If you have something to say.
I was going to say, and I would love to talk about task chains. It's one of my favorite mechanics. I really like the way it creates sort of storytelling opportunities with a cast of characters trying to do certain things, and I think they can be a lot of fun to implement. And so I think that's a topic as well.
And then we could do that next time for sure. Task chains, I made a note of it. And if you viewers want us to talk about anything specific, hit us up on social media at Two Brother Gaming, right?
At Two Brother Game 8 or something like that.
At Two Brother. Well, it'll be in the description of the YouTube video and the podcast, so you guys can find him. But also hit me up if you don't find me on social media and you want to email me at JonJonTheWise on social media or JonJonTheWise@gmail.com, and we'll love to cover any topics that you guys have as far as homebrew goes. As you can see, we can chat about this all day. Never a dull moment talking about breaking the game. So if you guys have any other suggestions, we can talk about that. But other than task chains, is there anything else that is like one of your go-to homebrew ideas?
I'd say that the other one is really trying to find ways to make stealth interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond just a stealth check. It's kind of almost falls into that persuasion check in the way you conduct stealth. It shouldn't be just necessarily, I passed.
Yeah,
You know,
you're a ghost because you passed the test. Yeah.
So that one, and then I always like to have. It dropped out of my head. But it's kind of along the same lines as the stealth and persuasion. In fantasy games, you get a lot of people are like, I check for traps.
Oh, yeah.
You do a trap. It's like, but how do you make that interesting rather than just being a roll?
Perception checks. Let's break down perception checks. Traps. I'm gonna put traps too because I completely agree with you. That's like one of those things that every game master that I've ever talked to is like, how do I stop my players from walking into every room and rolling a perception check every time they walk into a room? And then there's stuff like passive perception that D&D 5e does, and I get it. I usually, well, I guess we should save it. Let's save it for the next time. See, we just keep going, dude.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
All right.
It's awesome.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening, Patrick. I seriously appreciate you coming on. This is an honor to have you on. I've been wanting to work with you, and I knew it was going to be great. I had a great time, and I'm excited for our show in the future.
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me. The honor's mine of being able to talk with you about this after watching you endlessly on YouTube and all your great posts and stuff that you do. So it's absolute pleasure. And yes, as fun as I expected it to be. So thank you.
Thanks, man. I appreciate the support. And I sincerely wish you the best in your two games, your creation of your games, your channel, everything you and your brother do. I love it. I love that your brother's involved, keeping it in the family. That's like, it touches my heart. I love that kind of stuff. I'm a sad sap that loves like family stuff. So, but yeah, that's
behind
cool.
that cyberpunk exterior.
Yeah, I'm just a softie that loves my family.
Very good. And hey, folks, if you aren't a Patreon of JonJonTheWise, do it. It's worth it. So
thank you.
Great stuff coming out.
My first patron right here, dude. My first. I'll always remember that. As soon as the gates open, dude. Yeah, that's awesome. All right. Other than that, ladies and gentlemen, make sure you are following us all on social media. We'll see you on the next one when we are making the game. Happy gaming, guys. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.